What happens when two Hollywood legends collide live on daytime television, in front of millions of viewers, and the tension is so raw you can almost hear the studio air crackle. That's exactly what happened the moment Jamie Foxx sat across from Whoopi Goldberg on The View, in what was supposed to be a lighthearted interview. Instead, it turned into an unforgettable on-air clash that left the audience frozen in their seats. Trust me, you won't want to miss what unfolded next. The morning had begun like any other episode. The bright studio lights bathed the set in a cheerful glow, the iconic View table polished to a flawless shine. The audience murmured with excitement as they took their seats. Jamie Foxx, ever the charismatic star, entered wearing a navy suit, his signature grin lighting up his face. For a moment, the tension in the air felt non-existent. But those who know Jamie's style, the quick wit, the unfiltered humor, could sense a spark beneath the surface. And across from him, Whoopi Goldberg, a veteran of countless interviews and debates, sat with her arms folded just so, watching. It was as if she had sensed that today would be different. The show opened with laughter, light banter about Jamie's latest project, a new thriller he'd been promoting all week. Yet, something shifted when one of the co-hosts asked about Jamie's recent social media post, one that had sparked controversy. The question was framed casually, but Jamie's eyes flickered with something sharper than amusement. "See, that's the thing," Jamie began, leaning forward slightly, his voice still smooth but carrying an edge. "People love to twist things online. You post something personal, and suddenly it's everybody's business. That's not what I said, not what I meant." The audience gave a few nervous chuckles. Whoopi raised an eyebrow, adjusting her glasses. "Well," she said in that iconic raspy tone, "when you're in the public eye, Jamie, people are going to react. That's part of the deal." Jamie laughed, but it wasn't quite the easy laugh fans were used to. "Part of the deal? I've been in this game for decades, Whoopi. I know the deal. But it doesn't mean people get to rewrite my words." The energy shifted again. The live studio crowd, usually warm and quick to applaud, fell into a hush. One could hear the soft hum of the cameras zooming in for a close-up. Jamie's smile lingered, but his eyes were fixed on Whoopi now, as if daring her to push further. Whoopi didn't flinch. "We're all responsible for how we use our platform," she said calmly. "You can't just throw something out there and then complain when folks call you on it." For a moment, the tension was unspoken yet tangible. The other co-hosts exchanged glances, sensing the subtle but undeniable spark of confrontation. Jamie tilted his head slightly. "With all due respect, Whoopi, I didn't come here to be lectured. I came here to talk about my film. But since we're talking about responsibility, maybe we should also talk about how the media, and sometimes shows like this, can fan the flames." That line landed like a dropped glass. The audience gasped audibly, the sound sharp in the otherwise still studio. One of the co-hosts cleared her throat nervously, trying to steer things back to neutral territory, but the moment had already ignited. Whoopi's lips tightened, and she leaned just slightly closer. "Jamie, we've all dealt with the press twisting things. We've all been there. But I'm not going to sit here and let you say we're the problem when you put it out there first." The air between them was charged, as if two opposing forces had locked eyes and neither was willing to back down. Jamie's voice dropped lower, steadier, more intense. "I respect you, Whoopi. You know I do. But sometimes you gotta understand, you're not always on the right side of calling someone out." The audience was caught between holding its breath and erupting in whispers. In that instant, the cheerful morning show felt more like a courtroom drama. The cameramen exchanged hurried looks as producers gestured frantically behind the scenes, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let this rare, unscripted tension play out. And then, as if scripted by fate, Jamie added, "You've been in this business a long time, Whoopi. Maybe sometimes you forget what it's like to be on the other side of the table." That remark drew a collective "oh" from the audience. Even a few gasps. Whoopi's eyes narrowed just a fraction, but her voice remained calm, too calm. "I haven't forgotten a thing, Jamie. I just don't believe in blaming everybody else for the fallout." The other co-hosts shuffled in their seats. One tried to inject a bit of humor to lighten the mood, but it fell flat. The tension was magnetic, pulling everyone, audience and viewers at home, deeper into the unfolding drama. Somewhere off camera, a producer whispered, "Stay with it, don't cut." It was the kind of live television moment they knew would be replayed endlessly, dissected, debated. And as the camera zoomed in on Jamie's composed yet slightly clenched jaw, it was clear this clash had only just begun. The silence that followed Jamie's last words stretched like a taut wire across the set. The air felt heavy, the way it does just before a summer storm breaks. In the front row, a woman clutched her program guide so tightly it crumpled in her hand. Whoopi sat back slightly, her expression a masterclass in composure. But those who'd watched her for years could see the subtle shift. The way her eyes hardened just enough to signal that this wasn't going to be brushed aside. "Well," she said finally, her voice slow and deliberate, "that's an interesting thing to say, considering you've been on this side plenty of times. You know the questions don't come out of nowhere." Jamie shifted in his seat, his fingers laced together as if holding back an impulse. He smiled, not the movie star smile, but one that held a glint of defiance. "Questions are fine. But sometimes, Whoopi, the way they're asked? The tone. That's what turns a conversation into a confrontation." The audience hummed softly, like a crowd at a boxing match sensing the next punch. A younger co-host, clearly nervous, tried to step in. "Maybe we should, focus on the movie for a minute." But Jamie raised a hand gently, not to silence her, but to steady the moment. "No, let's be real here. This is about more than my film. This is about how we talk to each other, especially on shows like this. The way we frame somebody's story." Whoopi's brow arched. "Framing, huh? So now it's our fault for asking what everyone else is asking." Jamie's voice softened, but there was a weight in it that drew the room in. "It's not about blame. It's about empathy. I'm not the villain some headlines made me out to be. And I didn't expect to walk in here and feel like I had to defend myself, especially not to you." The way he said "to you" hung in the air, sharp and pointed. The audience shifted uncomfortably, some glancing at each other, sensing this was no longer just a debate over a soundbite. It was personal now. Whoopi leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her tone still measured but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Jamie, I get it. You feel like people are coming after you. I've been there. But I'm telling you, this isn't personal. We have a job to do here. We ask the tough questions because somebody has to." Jamie's eyes didn't waver. "And I get that. But maybe sometimes the tough questions need a little heart behind them. A little less of the gotcha." The audience murmured, torn between agreement and unease. Another co-host jumped in, desperate to steer things back to safer ground. "Jamie, your new movie has been getting incredible reviews. Let's talk about how you prepared for such a demanding role." Jamie smiled faintly, but kept his gaze on Whoopi. "We can get to the movie. But let's not pretend this isn't what people will be talking about tomorrow. You know it. I know it. The cameras know it." The comment drew a ripple of gasps and even a few stifled laughs from the audience. For a fleeting moment, Whoopi's lips twitched as though she might smile, but she didn't. Instead, she asked, "So, what do you want from us, Jamie? A free pass? No questions? Just applause?" Jamie shook his head slowly. "No, I want respect. I want honesty. I want to sit here and not feel like I'm being ambushed for something I already explained." The tension had reached a point where even the crew members behind the cameras were motionless, eyes locked on the two veterans of entertainment locked in a battle of wills. Then, as if sensing the need to reclaim control, Whoopi straightened in her chair and said, "You know what, Jamie? Maybe what you need isn't another explanation. Maybe you just need to accept that when you're in the spotlight sometimes burns." The words struck like a match to dry tinder. Jamie laughed, but it was a laugh without mirth. "And maybe you need to remember what it's like to be under that same burning light before you judge how somebody else handles it." The audience erupted, some clapping in support, others gasping at the audacity of the exchange. One co-host held up her hands, trying to calm the room. Let's all take a breath here." But the moment couldn't be tamed. It had taken on a life of its own. Jamie leaned back now, the picture of composure, but with a flicker of something raw in his eyes. Frustration, maybe even hurt. "I came here out of respect. To share my work. I didn't come here to spar. But if we're going to spar, let's be real about why." Whoopi tilted her head, her gaze steady, her voice soft but cutting. "We're being real, Jamie. That's what this table is for. You don't like the heat? Then maybe this isn't the place." The audience gasped again, the sound sharp and collective, like a single intake of breath. The camera lingered on Jamie's face as he processed the words, his expression a mix of disbelief and restrained anger. Somewhere in the control room, a producer muttered, "We can't cut now. This is television history in the making." And as the commercial break loomed, the two sat across from each other in a silence that spoke louder than any words could. The clash wasn't over. It was only gathering force. When the show returned from the commercial break, the bright theme music rang out, but it felt strangely hollow, like a cheery tune played at a funeral. The audience, though smiling nervously for the cameras, sat forward in their seats, bracing themselves for the next act of the drama they'd just witnessed. Jamie Foxx sat with one leg crossed over the other, his posture relaxed in appearance, but his eyes sharp and watchful. He had that look, the look of a man who'd decided that if he was going to be challenged, he wouldn't shy away. Whoopi Goldberg, on the other side of the table, had her hands folded neatly in front of her. Her expression was neutral, but her stillness conveyed the readiness of someone who'd been through countless on-air confrontations and was not about to back down now. The camera's red light blinked on. The co-host sitting in the middle, clearly tasked by the producers to play mediator, cleared her throat. "We're back on The View," she said, her smile tight. "Before the break, we were having a spirited conversation with Jamie Foxx. We're going to continue, but let's try to keep it constructive." The audience tittered nervously. Jamie offered a small, polite nod. "I'm all for constructive," he said. "That's why I'm here. I didn't come to argue. I came to talk. But I'm not going to sit here and let people think I'm running from the tough stuff either." Whoopi tilted her head slightly. "Nobody said you were running," she replied evenly. "But when you come to this table, you know we're going to ask about more than just your movie. That's the deal." Jamie's lips curled in a wry smile. "Oh, I know the deal. But sometimes it feels like the questions aren't questions. They're accusations dressed up like curiosity." A soft ripple of reaction came from the audience. A few claps, some murmurs of agreement. Whoopi shifted in her seat, her eyes narrowing just a fraction. "Accusations? Jamie, no one's accusing you of anything. We're asking about your own words, your own posts. That's not an accusation. That's accountability." Jamie let out a short laugh, the kind that carried more disbelief than humor. "Accountability is fair. I don't mind owning my words. But you know as well as I do how the media machine works. One sentence gets pulled out, it gets spun, and suddenly it's not about what you said, it's about what somebody decided you meant." Whoopi held his gaze. "And what do you think we are, Jamie? We're not tabloids. We're sitting here, face to face, giving you the chance to explain yourself. But you can't blame every reaction on the machine. Sometimes people just react to what's there." Jamie's expression softened for a moment, as if he were weighing her words. "I get that. I really do. But sometimes I think folks forget there's a person behind the headline. A person who maybe said something clumsy, or got misread, or just had a bad day. But once it's out there, it's like you stop being a person and become a target. And when you come to a table like this, it feels less like a conversation and more like a cross-examination." The studio went quiet. The audience wasn't sure whether to applaud or stay silent. The honesty in Jamie's voice had cut through the combative energy, landing like a truth bomb in the middle of the set. For a beat, even Whoopi looked as though she was considering what he said. But then she leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but with a subtle edge. "You think you're the only one who's felt like a target? Come on. You think I haven't been dragged for something I said? You think I haven't sat here and had my words twisted by headlines? I've been in this business for decades too. I know what it's like. But I also know you can't just blame the world for misunderstanding you. Sometimes you have to own the way you put it out there." Jamie nodded slowly, but his eyes still carried that spark of defiance. "I do own it. That's why I'm here. But I came here thinking we were going to talk about my work, my craft. Instead, I feel like we're leading with the controversy because that's what makes good TV." The remark drew an audible reaction from the audience, a mix of gasps and scattered claps. One of the younger co-hosts jumped in again, trying to steer the tone. "Jamie, I think people want to understand both, the art and the person behind it. That's why this conversation is important." Jamie glanced at her, then back at Whoopi. "I don't mind having that conversation. I just want it to feel like a conversation. Not like I'm on trial." Whoopi's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "Well, nobody's putting you on trial. But you can't come here expecting us to ignore what people are talking about. That's not what this show is." Jamie leaned forward now, his voice lower, more deliberate. "And I respect that. I respect the show. I respect you. But respect goes both ways. You don't have to come at me like I'm guilty of something just for saying what I said." The tension between them was electric again, the kind that made the audience sit so still that you could hear the faint whir of the cameras adjusting focus. A man in the audience whispered to his neighbor, "This is better than any drama I've seen in years." The camera cut briefly to the faces of the other co-hosts, one biting her lip nervously, another staring down at her notes as if hoping for a cue to step in. Finally, the mediator co-host spoke up. You know what I think this moment shows? It shows that we need more conversations like this, not less. We need to be able to have the tough talks without turning it into a shouting match. Jamie looked at her and nodded slightly. I agree, but it's hard to do that when people come in ready for a fight. I didn't come in ready for a fight. I came in ready to talk about a story I poured myself into. And I still think that story deserves as much attention as the noise around it. For a brief moment, the air in the studio shifted. The audience's posture relaxed slightly, as though they sensed a chance for the conversation to return to a calmer place. But Whoopi wasn't finished. Her voice softened, but there was a note of steel in it. Look, Jamie, I respect your work. You know that. I respect you. But you also know that when you're Jamie Foxx, when you're somebody whose voice carries, you can't just say things and then be surprised that people care. That's the price of being heard. Jamie's jaw tightened slightly. I know that. I've lived that. But sometimes I wish people remembered I'm human too. I'm not just a headline. I'm not just a soundbite. I'm a person sitting here trying to tell my story. And sometimes it feels like the world forgets that. The mediator smiled at both of them. Maybe we all learned something here today. Maybe the real story isn't the clash. It's that two people who've been in the spotlight for decades can still sit down, have it out, and maybe find a little understanding. Jamie let out a low chuckle. We're not there yet, but we're working on it. Whoopi laughed softly in response, the tension between them easing for the first time all morning. The audience applauded warmly, sensing a shift, not a resolution, but a fragile bridge being built across the divide. But as the camera panned out to capture the wide shot of the table, the red light blinked again, signaling another break. The producers knew the drama wasn't over. If anything, it had just taken on a deeper, more compelling dimension. Behind the scenes, as the hosts shuffled their notes and the crew reset for the final segment, whispers buzzed among the audience. Did you see the way he looked at her when he said that? Whoopi's face when he mentioned respect. Oh my God. I can't believe this is happening on live TV. As the lights dimmed slightly for the break, Jamie sat quietly, staring at the table for a long moment, then lifted his gaze toward Whoopi. She looked back at him, her expression unreadable, and then, almost imperceptibly, she gave a small nod. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't surrender. But it was something. And in that subtle exchange, the audience sensed it. The clash was far from over, but the conversation had shifted from combat to something more profound. A reckoning between two icons of their craft. The words landed with a weight that rippled through the room. For a moment, even Whoopi's expression softened, as though she were seeing past the clash to the man sitting across from her. The mediator co-host seized the moment. Maybe this is the heart of it. We're all human. We're all trying to be heard. And maybe the real problem is that sometimes we listen to react, not to understand. The audience applauded softly, almost tentatively, as if unsure whether they were applauding the sentiment or the fragile truce forming in front of them. Jamie sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. That's fair. That's all I've been asking for. A chance to be understood before I get judged. Whoopi nodded slightly. Fair enough. But you have to know that as long as you're in the public eye, people are going to have opinions. And sometimes those opinions are going to feel unfair. Jamie's lips curved in a small, almost weary smile. Oh, I know. I've had my share of unfair. But I keep showing up anyway. Because I believe in the work. And I believe in talking it out. Even when it gets messy like this. The mediator co-host laughed lightly, the tension in her shoulders easing. Well, this is definitely a conversation people will be talking about. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. The audience chuckled along, though the mood was still charged. The kind of charge that keeps people glued to their screens, waiting to see what might happen next. The camera zoomed in slightly on Jamie as he looked down at his hands for a brief moment, then back up at Whoopi. There was something almost vulnerable in his eyes now, as though the confrontation had stripped away a layer of performance. He said softly, You know, I've always respected you. I grew up watching you. You were one of the reasons I believed you could be bold and funny and smart in this business. So when I sit here and feel like I'm being boxed in, it hits different. I didn't expect that from you. Whoopi blinked slowly, and for the first time since the clash began, she looked almost disarmed. Her voice, when she spoke, was gentler. I didn't mean to make you feel boxed in. But I also can't let you off the hook when people are looking for answers. That's my job. Jamie nodded. And my job is to keep showing up. Even when it's hard. Even when I feel like I'm walking into the fire. The studio was quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of quiet. Not the tense silence of conflict, but the breathless hush of an audience witnessing something raw and real. One of the producers gestured frantically behind the cameras, signaling to stretch the segment. This was TV gold, not just fireworks, but vulnerability, honesty, humanity. The mediator smiled at both of them. Maybe we all learned something here today. Maybe the real story isn't the clash. It's that two people who've been in the spotlight for decades can still sit down, have it out, and maybe find a little understanding. Jamie let out a low chuckle. We're not there yet, but we're working on it. Whoopi laughed softly in response, the tension between them easing for the first time all morning. The audience applauded warmly, sensing a shift, not a resolution, but a fragile bridge being built across the divide. But as the camera panned out to capture the wide shot of the table, the red light blinked again, signaling another break. The producers knew the drama wasn't over. If anything, it had just taken on a deeper, more compelling dimension. Behind the scenes, as the hosts shuffled their notes and the crew reset for the final segment, whispers buzzed among the audience. Did you see the way he looked at her when he said that? Whoopi's face when he mentioned respect, oh my God. I can't believe this is happening on live TV. As the lights dimmed slightly for the break, Jamie sat quietly, staring at the table for a long moment, then lifted his gaze toward Whoopi. She looked back at him, her expression unreadable, and then, almost imperceptibly, she gave a small nod. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't surrender. But it was something. And in that subtle exchange, the audience sensed it. The clash was far from over, but the conversation had shifted from combat to something more profound. A reckoning between two icons of their craft. When the cameras blinked back on for the final segment, the room felt like the aftermath of a thunderstorm, charged, dampened, yet still humming with the energy of something powerful that had just passed through. The host seated in the center smiled a little too brightly, clearly trying to restore the show's signature morning show warmth. We're back, she said, and we've had a very lively conversation today. But before we wrap up, Jamie, we really do want to talk about your new film because it's one of the most anticipated releases of the year. Jamie offered a small nod, his smile faint but genuine. Thank you. I'd love that. That's why I'm here, after all. Whoopi glanced at him from across the table, her expression softer than it had been earlier in the show. There was no smile, but there was a quiet acknowledgement in her eyes, as if conceding, in her own way, that the confrontation had revealed more than either of them had planned. The co-host beside Jamie leaned forward enthusiastically, trying to steer the conversation back to safer waters. The movie's getting incredible early reviews. People are saying it's some of your best work. What drew you to this role? Jamie relaxed a little as he began to speak about the film, about the preparation, the months spent living in the skin of a complicated character, about the sacrifices and the late nights on set. His voice regained that familiar rhythm, that easy charm that had first made him a household name. For a few minutes, it felt like a normal interview again, until the mediator co-host, perhaps emboldened by the earlier exchange, asked the question everyone at home was silently wondering. Jamie, given everything that's happened recently, the reactions, the posts, and even today's conversation, does it change the way you approach being in the public eye? Jamie hesitated, his gaze briefly dropping to his hands before returning to meet hers. It does. You start to realize that no matter what you do, there's always going to be a spotlight. And the spotlight, it's not forgiving. But I also think we need to keep talking to each other, even when it's uncomfortable. Because if we stop talking, we stop understanding. The audience responded with a soft, thoughtful murmur, a reaction not of entertainment, but of recognition. Whoopi spoke next, her voice carrying a note of measured reflection. That's true. I've been doing this a long time, and I've seen a lot of people shy away when things get messy. But if you can sit at the table, take the heat, and still have the conversation, that says something. Jamie looked at her then, and for the first time all morning, there was no edge in his expression. That's all I wanted. A real conversation. The audience applauded, this time not in bursts of shock or nervous tension, but in a warm, sustained wave that filled the studio. The mediator smiled, sensing a resolution of sorts. I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you, Jamie, for coming here and for being open. And Whoopi, well, you always keep it real. A soft laugh rippled across the table. Jamie chuckled too, shaking his head slightly as if to say, only on live TV. The music swelled for the closing credits, the hosts exchanged polite smiles, and the camera panned out to capture the wide shot of the table before cutting to commercial one final time. But even as the show wrapped, the real story was just beginning. The moment the red lights on the cameras turned off, the studio buzzed like a beehive. Crew members whispered to one another as they coiled cables and adjusted equipment. Audience members began pulling out their phones, frantically typing messages, posting clips, and exchanging wide-eyed looks that said, "Did we really just see that happen?" Jamie stood, shaking hands with a couple of the co-hosts. His posture was relaxed again, but there was a subtle tension still lingering in the way he held his shoulders. When he reached Whoopi, they exchanged a brief handshake, firm, professional, and with the faintest flicker of mutual respect. "Good talk," Jamie said quietly, just for her. Whoopi nodded, equally subdued. "Good talk," she echoed, though her tone suggested the conversation had only scratched the surface. As Jamie left the stage, a handful of audience members stood and applauded, an unscripted gesture that caught the attention of everyone else in the room. Soon more hands joined in, until the sound of applause filled the space once again. This time, not for entertainment, but for the rawness of what had unfolded. Behind the scenes, a producer muttered into his headset, "This is going to break the internet by tonight." And he was right. Within an hour of the episode airing, social media lit up like wildfire. On Twitter, hashtags like #JamieVSWhoopi, #TheView-Clash, and #LiveTVDrama were trending worldwide. Clips of the exchange, Jamie's pointed remarks, Whoopi's calm but cutting responses, the stunned expressions of the other co-hosts, were shared and reshared, racking up millions of views. Comment sections exploded. Jamie was brave for saying what so many feel about the media. Whoopi was just doing her job, he's overreacting. That was the realest conversation I've seen on TV in years. Late-night talk show hosts wasted no time splicing together the most dramatic moments for their opening monologues. News outlets ran headlines like, "Jamie Foxx confronts Whoopi Goldberg on live TV. Sparks fly on The View. Clash of Titans. Foxx and Goldberg's heated debate stuns viewers." By evening, entertainment reporters were camping outside the studio, hoping to catch a comment from either star. But both Jamie and Whoopi stayed silent for the rest of the day, letting the moment speak for itself. For viewers at home, the clash became more than just a viral TV moment. It was a cultural flashpoint, a reminder of the complicated relationship between celebrities, media, and the audiences who consume their stories. Back in the studio, long after the cameras had been shut off and the seats emptied, a few staff members lingered, still replaying the morning's events in hushed tones. One of them, a veteran crew member who'd seen countless live shows, shook his head with a mix of awe and disbelief. "I've been here 20 years, he said quietly. "Never seen anything like that. That wasn't just TV. That was something else." In his hotel room that night, Jamie scrolled through the storm of reactions online. Some defended him passionately, others criticized him fiercely. But he lingered longest on a single comment beneath a clip of the handshake he'd shared with Whoopi at the end of the show. Respect isn't about agreeing. It's about showing up. Jamie exhaled slowly, as if letting go of some of the weight he'd been carrying. Across town, Whoopi sat with her evening tea, watching a replay of the segment. When she reached the part where Jamie spoke about being human behind the headlines, she paused the video for a long moment, staring at the frozen frame on the screen. The day had been exhausting, but in her heart, she knew the conversation had been necessary. The clash had begun as a confrontation, fiery, sharp-edged, and unflinching. But by the time the cameras turned off, it had become something deeper. A reckoning between two voices of experience, each demanding to be seen not as icons, but as people. For those who had watched live, it was more than an episode of daytime TV. It was a glimpse into what happens when honesty cuts through the polished veneer of celebrity interviews. And for millions around the world watching clips online, it became a reminder that even in the glare of the spotlight, the most powerful moments are often the ones that are unscripted. Now we want to hear from you. Whose side were you on in this unforgettable on-air clash? Jamie Foxx's, demanding empathy and understanding, or Whoopi Goldberg's, standing firm for accountability and tough questions? Tell us what you think in the comments below. Was this confrontation a necessary reckoning, or an avoidable feud that went too far? And if you want more stories like this, the raw, unfiltered moments that show the real human drama behind the headlines. Make sure you subscribe to Prime Narrator and hit that notification bell. Like this video, share it with your friends, and join the conversation. Because as we saw today, the most explosive stories aren't always scripted. They unfold live, right before our eyes.